Hi. So excited to see some familiar faces from this past week and these past years. So thank you for coming to chat about positive sum ecosystems. So I work at Funding the Commons, which I will talk about a little bit later on in the talk. But we are a organization that does conferences with site-specific and local organizations across the world. So our next one coming up is in Tokyo in 2 weeks, designed with the DeSci Tokyo and Plurality Labs folks. So that's been a really incredible experience of learning about who our allies are in this public goods funding space and folks thinking about plurality and cooperation over in Japan. And so there's a kind of theme that we're developing throughout these conferences and our design jams for the year of positive sum ecosystems. And how do we define that? So, and one of my favorite essays by our friends Sam Hart, Laura Lottie, and Toby Shoren, they posit the idea that in positive sum worlds, positive externalities are created, thrive, and scale. So, for example, if we were thinking about different work that we are doing in crypto, making privacy-preserving protocols, building critical decentralized infrastructure, creating novel ways of coordinating, expanding the ways that transparency and attestation can work together. The work that we're doing is public goods insofar as positive externalities are created, not just within our ecosystem of funding our friends to live, which is also a positive effect of all of our work, I would say, but also having a positive impact on society at large. So in thinking about I guess my whole time of working in this public goods space, that piece by them has been really influential to me of continually thinking about what does it mean to participate in the act of funding the commons, and what is the world that we are building as actors, creating spaces for discourse around impact assessment and evaluation, and determining ways to expand funding flows. So to think about how the positive sum worlds context can be deeply grounded in building our ecosystems, I think it's also really useful to turn to concepts from permaculture design that take ecosystem out from being this metaphor that it is in crypto. So, often my job has been ecosystem builder or whatever. And, if you talk to people working in environmental space, they're like, what is that? Are you like a bug of some kind? And so for us, it's ecosystems are dynamic and interdependent, balancing various functions through which the natural world is able to balance and regulate and continue creating abundance in itself. So effective permaculture design draws on these naturally occurring cycles and patterns in order to expand, the functionality and production and efficiency of the land. And so we want to do the same thing with the funding cycles and modes of access to abundance creation that we are doing in this grants world. So just a plug of the fact that I am really passionate about developing these ideas of learning directly from permaculture and that world as we think about ecosystem design for pop-up villages or, coordinations or these different ways of marrying the digital and physical that a lot of us are exploring here in the Edge City, Zuzulu, et cetera, world. So that was a event that we just had at Edge Esmeralda, and we are super interested in continuing to partner about this topic. So if you are interested in nerding out about the intersection of permaculture and digital ecosystem building, then let's talk about it. But specifically for this topic, for positive sum ecosystems, then the functions of creation, production, consumption, and balancing form this virtual cycle between stakeholders. So Juan Benet has this talk that many of you, I'm sure, have seen about how do we build toward protopias, which would be, I guess, a utopian structure in which, funding is abundant and well-directed and accurately assessed, and funding streams from institutional actors and VCs and folks like that are able to flow into our more fringe work and, as they would define it in Web3. And so I think, it's super useful to think about these feedback loops very explicitly. So, what are the elements of some of these feedback loops? Obviously, the problem identification and, that many of us are doing in the space, and we will be talking about this more in the longer workshop at 2 with my colleague Teresa about what are the kind of problems we can identify and solutions we can make about those for the intentional building of these ecosystems, also standard setting and creating robust methods. So the folks before me went through a lot of really interesting and useful examples there, but I think this is one space that's super important as we are creating directional cycles. What are the constraints and definitions of those directions? The speed of those cycles, who are they, actually impacting? So also super interested to talk about that, as that is one of the major themes of our conferences and residencies this year. And it's also super important to think about some of these novel funding mechanisms like DRIPs and the Steers Karmic Engine, bread chain, like these different emerging like second order funding mechanisms that are coming in to fill in the space that was is starting to be institutionalized with retroactive and proactive funding. So already talked about that. Oh yeah, so a really important part, which we will also get more into in our workshop, is that I think that having this positive sum ecosystems view taken from permaculture design enables us to think about defining grants funding itself as a design space. So what I mean by that is, there are many, like an undercurrent of complaints that are always happening about how grant cycles are run, and many of those issues are super pertinent, but very difficult to talk about because people don't want to, be biting the hand that feeds them about, access to these type of funding. But it does end up having a huge impact when, different types of non-technical work are funded in certain cycles, and then it ends up being that there's no longer funding for non-technical work. And then viewing that, as a design space for iteration enables us to think more deeply about, why is it that happens? Like, why is there a continuous turn from seeming abundance for non-technical production to constraining more into things that can be measured in GitHub commits or on-chain, confirmations? And I think, delving into that, there's the core of many challenges, such as, this impact measurement problem that they were just speaking about before, where, it's a lot easier to measure the created value of an app that's built than, the benefit of work that we do at Funding the Commons, or work, here at Regions Village, that are playing also essential roles in the community, but are much more difficult by their nature to measure while being equally valuable. So I think, thinking about these things from a place of, co-creation versus a place of, fear and scarcity is super important. And drawing into that, it's really valuable to start developing out user pathways. So within, and I hope to make a longer slide about this part, but I ran out of time. But I think there's getting into, as we start thinking about this increasing wealth of opportunities for types of funding pathways that you can go down, both as a grant operator and as a grant recipient, we are starting to have an expanded ontological framework of, DRIPS type funding based on, conditions of work that people have, contributed in different ways, versus retroactive funding, which has a very different, payout cycle, a very different way of measuring, a very different, as the folks were talking about before, a need for measuring the impact over time of something that already happened, which, all of these have a very different pathway through them, basically. So I think starting to define what those are and make it a lot clearer and more accessible will reduce some of the systemic issues that we are starting to see several years into these grant cycles shaping the behavior and incentive design of our space. For example, the continual burnout that many people report to me of constantly responding to get coin cycles, and this feeling of we have to respond to this right now because we need money and this is an opportunity, and also maybe such an opportunity won't come again for non-technical work being funded, et cetera. So a continual move out of the scarcity mindset through iterating on a deeper understanding of what grant cycles should be, people should go into when. And I think it's really exciting in our particular space that unlike folks dealing with like EU grants or something, then it's like a who funds the funders situation. Like the grant operators themselves, Kevin, James, all these folks that we're continually talking to throughout the day also want to shape the grant cycles, the way they're running, the way that community engagement is shown in a really tangible way together with the needs of the community, so that we can all build each other up and be funding significant work. Another super important aspect of the design space is this concept of standards co-creation. So looking to see if Laudemu is here, but yeah, obviously one of my favorite folks in the space for doing really important work on this impact metrics assessment and definition, and the fact that we have these multiple interlocking circles of defining the time scale and logistics of grant cycles, defining the metrics themselves, and defining where this funding goes and to whom. I think we have a really exciting opportunity here for co-creating what we are able to accomplish together in this ecosystem. And I want to again mention the design jam that Eugene said, which we are throwing together in Bangkok just before DevCon during Bangkok Funding the Commons. And that will be 4 days of grant operators, recipients, and other, thinkers and builders in the space working to really deeply solve some of these challenges together. And I wanted to just tease another thing because I have no sense of time, so I don't know how long I have. This concept of cultural debt, and that's created from some of these cycles the continuous responsive nature of these cycles. So just to go into this metaphor a little bit, and this is another option of something that we will potentially go through in the workshop. So I'm sure everyone who's involved with software development is familiar with the concept of technical debt, which is basically when you're moving fast and breaking things, then there's all of these corners that are cut in terms of messy code base or lack of attribution to certain people, or building up processes because you need to respond in a quick and desperate way versus laying out sustainable processes over time. And all of these things have a purpose behind them. You go into someone's disaster code base or Google Drive or marketing archive or whatever, and you're like, what were these people thinking? And then, after a month, you're like, okay, that's why it was like this. And, so all of these choices have something of why it was like that. And so this is a metaphor that I was developing at ECC 2 years ago about building culture within projects in general, but I think it also is especially relevant to this positive sum ecosystem building idea, which is we can extrapolate from technical debt to this concept of cultural debt. So practices that keep people in a cycle of burnout, practices that make folks feel like their contributions are not being as recognized relative to the amount of funds they're getting. For example, phenomenon that happened, many of the people that are kind of, spending their nights and weekends applying for these grants in a very compressed time scale, not even being, the folks on the development team that might be receiving a lot of the grants. And, really thinking about these situations in which cultural debt happens and ends up, kind of spreading through the ecosystem and having real systemic effects, such as the people with deep context over time, becoming frustrated and not getting involved, or the or the phenomenon that the guys were mentioning before, where nobody wants to be the person that has to hold other people accountable for keeping track of milestones, because nobody wants to take their funds away from being able to receive funding for their hard work, even if they weren't tracking it very well or whatever. So, an important part of the design space we will be working on throughout this design jams, and also beginning to speak about today at 2, is identifying this cultural debt vectors. So here's some examples that are familiar to everyone. And this happens to be on the same grid, but I don't think that's into the cultural debt one. But anyway, these are the topics that Teresa and I identified as vectors in which cultural debt production happens. So really interested to start digging into this and co-improving the space together. So let's keep talking about it. And I ran out of time to put a slide talking about my major announcement today, which is our builder residency in Thailand. Applications are opening today. So yeah, please look on Funding the Commons and apply to that if you are a technical builder, and join us at the design jam I mentioned if you are a non-technical person in a software building sense, but want to lend your wisdom to solving these problems with us. So, thank you.
Okay. We still have a minute or two if you have any questions. Any questions from the audience?
Oh.
Yeah.
We're hiding, but also.
Yes. I had a question from a friend of mine who's watching online, and he's asking, how you create positive feedback loops between grant funders and recipients.
No.
So I'll tell you a perfect example from my conversation with James yesterday at the Get Coin White Canvas event, which is I really admire how Octant went right out there and started, offering this retroactive grants without really trying to impose any structure and letting this be emergent. And over the past year of going through several of these cycles, realized that some of these inherent issues about evaluation and measurement started arising. So then they started iterating on a way to address that, which is having more curated rounds, so that people that are applying for really technical grants that have very specific impact evaluation metrics are not even trying to be measured against something like Funding the Commons that, is going to fail completely on amount of on-chain commits, but would have other metrics in which, people kindly decided to give us funding. So I think that's a major example of them being responsive to the needs and feedback and, complex reality of grant recipients, basically.
Any other question? Okay, thank you, Beth.